Well, I am here with my friend Jim Stovall. Jim and I have known each other since college. And Jim, thanks so much for joining us this morning for this conversation.
Well, it's great to be with you in Awaken Chicago. I mean, I am just privileged to get to talk to any group that would have you in the congregation, much less as a pastor. So obviously, Awaken Chicago walks in faith and grace, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks so much. Well, I've shared a little bit with the church community some of the things that you've accomplished in your life, but I do want to highlight two things that I didn't mention that I know are your two greatest achievements. And I just want you to confirm this. First of all, is being married to your wife, Crystal, for 40 years.
Yes, that is very much an accomplishment for her, as it is for Tammy being with you all those same number of years.
Correct. And then probably just as big is it's true, isn't it, that you were a member of the 1980 Oral Roberts flag football championship team?
That is true. And I must tell you, as a young man, my highest aspiration was to be an American football player and play in the NFL. And the coaches and scouts assured me I had the size and speed to do that. My life took a different direction, which we'll probably talk about here after a while. But I always imagined lining up, coming out of the huddle and lining up next to a future Hall of Famer, all-pro lineman right next to me. So you can imagine what it felt like to come out of a huddle and line up next to Robert D. Campbell.
Well, I know it's a highlight of yours.
No.
Well, Jim, thanks so much for joining us. I'd like to spend a little time talking about a topic that can be difficult to chat about. And I think I shared with you, we're talking this morning at Awaken about divine healing. And, I've shared with the community that you lost your sight when you were in your 20s, and that when we met in college, at the time, we knew you had a degenerative eye condition, and absent a miracle, you would lose your vision. And, I know you prayed, we prayed, we both went to a university that was founded by someone who is known for praying for people to be healed, Oral Roberts. And to date, that prayer for divine healing for you has not yet been met. How have you processed that over the years?
Well, in the beginning, I was diagnosed. I thought I was headed to the University of Oklahoma to play on the national championship team, and I'd been recruited. I was going to go down there, and I'd gone for spring ball that year, and I thought, my future is set. And then every year before you go play Major League Football, you have to go get a physical. They want to make sure you're healthy before they take you out and try to kill you. And, the physical was taking a long time, and they shined a light in my eye. And eventually the doctors took me down a long hall, and they said, we're not sure why, and we're not sure when, but we do know someday you're going to be totally blind, and there's nothing we can do about it. And a little quick research on my part told me there's no blind guys in the NFL, so I had to go do something else with my life. Yeah. And my first reaction was, it was like a death. I mean, that was the only thing I'd ever seen myself doing, or the only thing I'd ever wanted to do in my life, and it was gone. Mm-hmm. And, the faith walk begins when our own plans for our life end. And that's what happened to me. And, I was angry, and I told God. I'd grown up in a church family, but I would say we were more religious than anything. And I'll tell you, religion's great right up until you have a crisis in your life, and then you have to go from religion to relationship. So I remember a morning, I was 18 years old. I got up and I had a conversation with God. I said, if you're real and you're really God, I need to know that there is a plan for me, and you still have something that I can do in my life. And I need to hear from you today. If you can imagine, the audacity, I put God on a 24-hour timer.
Yeah.
And every year here in my hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the state fair comes to town. And that fall, I decided I could still see enough. I'll go to the state fair, because I'd always been playing football and I couldn't go. And I went, and two things happened to me that day, Rob, that I have rarely talked about, because it's taken me years to put it into context. And The first thing I did when I walked into the big exhibition building, they had a demonstration from the previous Olympic Games.
Hmm.
And they had the gymnast out there. Frankly, I went down to look at the girls, is what I did. And about the time I got down there, they brought out the next group, and it was the weightlifters. And I remember watching those guys, and I thought that's something a guy could do even if he was losing his sight.
Hmm.
And I became a competitive weightlifter. I won the national champion as an Olympic weightlifter and got to finish my athletic career that way. I left that building and I walked down to Midway, and there was a big pavilion there, a big arena, and the sign said free concert. I had no idea who was playing. I had no idea when it started, but free really kind of fit my budget. So I went in and I sat on the front row. There was nobody else there yet. I sat on the front row and I prayed a little. I cried a little. I thought about those weightlifters a little. And I reminded God, we're down to, you got less than 10 hours to pull this off here. And, I've got to know that there's a place in this world, worst case scenario, for a blind guy. And I was so intent on my thoughts and prayers, the arena kind of filled up around me. And the first thing I was really conscious of was a voice I will never forget. It said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Tulsa State Fair, the one, the only, the legend, Ray Charles." And they brought Ray out, and he sat about 10 feet away from me. I'm on the front row, and Ray was absolutely magic. And I said, "Okay, Lord, I get it. I absolutely get it." And I went on to college shortly after that, and that's where you and I connected. And it was about 12, 13 years after that day at the fair, I was speaking at a business convention in Madison Square Garden in New York. I mean, God had found another way for me. I had a very successful business. I was speaking to 18,000 business people. And the promoter said, "Wow, that is exactly what I need. I have another group coming in next week. Will you stay in town and do another event for me?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I have some TV business to do and I'll stay." And he said, "I have another act in town if you want to go." And I was trying to think of a way to tell this man that is paying me more money than anybody should get for doing something they love. I was trying to figure out how to tell him I'm not comfortable out in public. I'm okay on stage, but as a blind guy, I still at that time wasn't comfortable. But just to be polite, I said, "Who do you got in town?" He said, "Tomorrow night, opening Carnegie Hall, Ray Charles." I said, yeah, I'll go to that. I said, "You got anything on the front row?" He said, I can get you on the front row." And I sat on the front row, and there's me and Ray 12, 13 years later. And afterwards, they took me backstage, and he was signing autographs. And they said, "He just needs to sign a couple more, and then you can sit down and talk to him." And I'll never forget, I'd been blind for several years at that point, and I didn't know that blind people could write. So I said, "How does he write?" And Ray heard that and said, "Who said that?" And I said, "My name's Jim Stovall, and I'm blind too. And I didn't know blind people could write." And he said, "Son, if anybody in your life ever cares enough about you to want your autograph, the least you can do is learn how to write your name." And he said, "Sit yourself down here." And he traced out and showed me how he wrote Ray Charles, and showed me how to write Jim Stovall. And that was the beginning of, I wouldn't call it a friendship, an acquaintance that we contacted back and forth several times before his death several years ago. But it was another 10 years before I could write anything other than Jim Stovall and Ray Charles. That's all I knew how to write, actually by hand. But it changed my life in a lot of ways. And the last time I was with Ray, he did his third to last concert here in Tulsa. And I went and I sat backstage and we talked, and he said, "Do you think when we get to heaven, we'll be able to see?" I said, I'm planning on it. And he said, "What do you think one of those angels looks like?" "Ray, I don't know." I said, "But they're these beings that God sends into our life to protect us and guide us and aid us. And if I had an angel, he'd look a lot like Ray Charles. Because, man, you were my guy when I needed you to be there." And and so many ways over so many days, Rob, I have seen my prayer answered, not in the way I chose. God is not cosmic room service.
Yeah.
He gives us what we need because he made us, and he knows what we need, and he gives us what we need often instead of what we ask for. When I was 3 years old, I wanted to ride my tricycle in the street. My driveway was slanted and it was small. The street man, that was smooth and level. And what a great place to ride your tricycle when you're 3 years old. And that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted to do that. My father wouldn't let me. He would not. First, he told me, then he physically kept me from doing that. And I explained to him, this is what I really want. Let me do this. I want this. And he wouldn't let me do that. And only when I had a different perspective did I understand my earthly father's admonition on that. And, someday we'll understand it all differently. And in one of my movies that was made out of one of my novels, I got to pick the music. They always let the blind guy work on the music. And so I picked Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson and Patsy Cline, and I got B.B. King to do a song. And it was so cool to meet him. And we were talking about when he first started. I said, what's your favorite song? If you had one song you had to take with you from now into eternity, what would it be? He said, it's an old spiritual we used to play when I was a kid in Mississippi. And it says, we'll understand it all by and by. But that don't mean we understand it today.
Jim, what would you say? And boy, I mean, thanks so much for sharing your story. What would you say to someone who right now is praying? They're sick or they're ill, they have a disease, they're praying for divine healing. That prayer has not yet been answered. What would you say to them?
Well, you need to continue to pray, and you need to ask for what you understand you want. But then the most powerful prayer ever was when in the garden, Jesus did not want to go to the cross. He knew what that was going to be. And if there be any way, let this cup pass from me. But then the most powerful prayer is, but not my will, but thy will be done. And, that's where we have to know that. And, as you mentioned, we went to Oral Roberts University. I knew Oral as a child because he was my father's employer. And then I knew him as the president of the university that you and I attended. But later in his life, he and I became friends, and we would exchange audio books and talk about it. And we talked about healing many times. And, he said, one thing I know about healing, he said, I know that good people get sick and good people die. Good people deal with afflictions. And he said, unless or until you're willing and ready to deal with that, you're not ready to be in the healing ministry. And we're all in that to a certain extent. And, I remember that. And then he told me that he has seen the things that came out of my blindness, because so many things in my contribution to life and my contribution toward my legacy would never have happened if I hadn't lost my sight. It'd be impossible.
Yeah.
And he said, Jim, he said, I prayed for you. I knew when I prayed for you, I never felt like you were going to get healed in the way that I was hoping you would in that minute. He said, I just never felt that release. But he said, I also look at your life and I've never seen a better healing. And Rob, it's not like I'm out here in turmoil or torment or whatever. I love my life. I don't know anybody I'd trade places with. I feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world. And I really believe that. So I'm very, very fortunate.
Well, Jim, thanks so much for sharing with us. Thank you on behalf of Awaken Chicago, and we'll talk to you soon. Love you, my friend.
Love you.
Take care.